At my retirement party, which I had not requested, announced, or agreed to, my business partner of 25 years stood up from the head of the table, adjusted the cuffs of a suit I had helped him afford, and told a room full of our colleagues that he was buying me out of the company I had co-founded. For my own good, he said, because my health was declining and I deserved to enjoy my golden years. The buyout price he named was roughly 30 cents on the dollar of the company's actual value. My wife was sitting 3 chairs to my left. Her hand was under the table, wrapped around his. I could not see it from where I sat, but I knew it was there, because I had known about the two of them for 8 months, and 8 months is long enough to learn the choreography of a betrayal so thoroughly that you can predict where the hands will be before the curtain goes up. The room applauded politely. Someone said, "Hear, hear." A woman from accounting wiped her eyes. My name was on a banner above the bar, "Happy Retirement Garrett," in gold letters that caught the restaurant lighting and made the word retirement look festive rather than funereal. I sat very still. I lifted my glass of sparkling water. I looked at Duncan, my partner, my co-founder, the man I had spent 25 years building something real with, and I said, "Congratulations." Then I turned to the woman seated beside me, the one I had introduced to the room at the start of the evening as Elena, a friend from graduate school, and I said, loud enough for the table to hear, "Elena, I think now would be a good time to introduce yourself properly." Elena Vasquez stood up. She was 51 years old, 5'6", dark hair pulled back, wearing a charcoal blazer and an expression that could have been carved from the same stone they use for federal courthouses. She reached into a jacket pocket and produced a leather credential case. She opened it and held it at shoulder height, badge facing outward. "My name is Special Agent Elena Vasquez," she said. "I'm with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Portland Division Financial Crimes Unit. I'm here this evening because Mr. Iverson has been a cooperating witness in a federal investigation for the past 6 months." The room did not gasp. That is a thing that happens in movies. What happened in the room was something worse than gasping. It was the total, instantaneous evacuation of sound, the kind of silence that doesn't just mean no one is talking, it means no one is breathing. The banner above the bar, "Happy Retirement Garrett," swayed slightly in the air from the ventilation system, and the gold letters caught the light, and for a moment the word retirement looked like something else entirely. Duncan's face did not fall. It froze. There is a difference. A face that falls is a face responding to surprise. A face that freezes is a face that has just recognized that the surprise is not a surprise at all, but an ending, the kind you cannot talk your way out of, the kind that was built slowly and carefully over many months by someone you had underestimated. My wife's hand came out from under the table. She placed it on the linen tablecloth, as if she had been caught resting it somewhere inappropriate, which she had. Before I tell you what happened in the next 10 minutes, how a 63-year-old environmental engineer from Portland, Oregon, used a retirement party he never asked for to end a partnership, a marriage, and a federal crime in a single evening, I want to offer a gentle reminder. Some elements of this story have been dramatized for the telling, but the lessons about family, respect, and the weight of our choices remain deeply real. The deepest betrayals are not committed by enemies. They are committed by the people who sat beside you when the company was 2 desks and a dream, and by the people who kissed you goodnight while planning to take everything you built. And before we go further, please tell me in the comments where you're watching from today. What city, what country, what time it is where you are. It helps this channel reach the people who need to hear stories like this, and it reminds me that even when your partner and your wife are holding hands under a table at your own retirement party, there are people out there who understand what it costs to sit still and wait for the right moment. My name is Garrett Iverson. I'm 63 years old, I was born in Bend, Oregon, to a father who worked for the Forest Service and a mother who taught biology at the community college. I grew up with pine sap on my hands and textbooks on the kitchen table. My father spent his career walking through forests that had been damaged by logging, mining, and fire, cataloging what had been lost, and recommending what could be restored. He was not a sentimental man. He was a systems man. He understood that nature did not care about intentions. It cared about conditions, and conditions could be measured, and measurements could be used to rebuild what had been destroyed. I inherited that disposition. I went to Oregon State for environmental engineering. I graduated in 1984. I went to work for a consulting firm in Portland that specialized in hazardous waste site assessment, the kind of work that involves drilling test wells in contaminated soil, measuring what's been poisoned, and designing systems to clean it up. It is not glamorous work. You spend your days in hard hats and rubber boots on sites that smell like diesel fuel and chemical failure. But it is necessary work. Someone has to clean up the messes that other people made and walked away from. And I discovered early in my career that I was good at it, not because I was smarter than anyone else, but because I was patient. And patience, in environmental remediation, is worth more than brilliance. I met Duncan Aldis in 1992. He was working at the same consulting firm on the business development side. I was the engineer who designed the cleanup systems. He was the salesman who brought in the contracts. We were, in the language of business partnerships, complementary. I built the technical foundation, he built the client relationships, and between us, we covered the full spectrum of what a company needs to survive. In 1999, we left the firm together and started our own, Iverson Aldis Environmental Solutions. We filed the incorporation papers on a Tuesday morning in January, sitting across from each other at a desk we had bought at a government surplus auction for $40. The desk had a cigarette burn on the corner and a drawer that didn't close. We each put in $30,000, everything we had, and we shook hands and we said, "Let's build something." We built something. Over 25 years, Iverson Aldis grew from 2 men and a surplus desk into a company with 91 employees, annual revenues of $34 million, and contracts with the Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of Defense, 3 state environmental agencies, and a dozen private sector clients ranging from petroleum companies to pharmaceutical manufacturers. We cleaned up Superfund sites. We designed groundwater treatment systems. We remediated contaminated soil on military bases. The work was steady, the margins were solid, and the reputation we built, for thoroughness, for honesty, for showing up when the site was ugly and staying until it was clean, was the kind of reputation that cannot be purchased. It can only be earned, one project at a time, over many years. Duncan was good at his part of the work. I want to be clear about that, because the story doesn't mean anything unless you understand that the partnership was real before it was corrupted. Duncan could walk into a room of skeptical government procurement officers and leave with a signed contract. He could charm a client who had been burned by 3 previous contractors into giving us a chance. He could talk for 45 minutes without notes and make every person in the room feel like they were the only one he was speaking to. He had a gift, and I respected it, and for a long time I believed that the gift was in service of what we had built together. I met Corinne through the company. She was hired as our office manager in 2003, when we were still small enough that one person could handle the phones, the scheduling, the bookkeeping, and the coffee. She was 37 at the time, sharp, organized. She had a way of making a chaotic office feel functional, the way a good stage manager makes a theater run without the audience ever knowing there was disorder backstage. I was 43 and had been divorced for 2 years from a brief first marriage that had ended without bitterness but also without much to show for it. Corinne and I started dating in 2004. We married in 2005. She left the company in 2006, when we both agreed that being married to the boss created dynamics that were unfair to the other employees, but she retained her knowledge of the company's systems, passwords she had set up, vendor accounts she had created, the architecture of the bookkeeping system she had designed during the years she ran the office. These were things I never thought to change because I trusted her completely, and trust, when it is abused, does not announce itself with an alarm. It simply stops protecting you and starts protecting someone else. For the first 15 years of our marriage, Corinne and I were good together. Not spectacular. I have never been a spectacular man, and I have long since made peace with that, but good. We lived in a craftsman bungalow in the Selwood neighborhood. We did not have children, a mutual decision we arrived at early and revisited occasionally without changing our minds. We traveled modestly, we read in the evenings, we walked the dog along the Willamette. It was a quiet life, and I believed it was a happy one because I had confused quiet with content and content with safe. Have you ever built something with someone? A business, a marriage, a life, and discovered years later that one of you was building and the other was dismantling, and the work looked the same from the outside? If you've lived inside that particular blindness, I want to hear about it in the comments. I want you to know you're not the only person who ever mistook loyalty for a two-way street. The cracks began, as they always do, with money. 8 months before the retirement party, a junior accountant at the firm named Priya Narayanan knocked on my office door. Priya was 29 years old, 3 years out of her master's program at Portland State. She was quiet, meticulous, and had the particular courage of a young person who has not yet learned that speaking up in a corporate environment can cost you your career. She came into my office with a laptop under her arm and an expression that I recognized immediately, the expression of an engineer who has found a fault in a system and is not sure whether to report it or pretend it doesn't exist. "Mr. Iverson," she said, "I found something I can't explain. I'd rather show you than describe it." She opened her laptop. She showed me a set of invoices from a subcontractor called Pacific Ridge Environmental Services. The invoices were for soil sampling work on a Department of Defense remediation project we were running at a former military installation in eastern Oregon. The invoices totaled $340,000 over the past 14 months. The work they described, soil borings, lab analysis, field technician hours, appeared consistent with the scope of the project, except that Pacific Ridge Environmental Services did not exist. The address listed on the invoices was a UPS mailbox store in Tigard. The phone number connected to a voicemail that no one answered. The company had no website, no state business registration, no contractor's license. Priya had tried to verify the company's existence through every database she had access to and had found nothing. I stared at the screen. The fluorescent light in my office buzzed. The coffee on my desk had gone cold. "Who approved these invoices?" I asked. Priya looked at me. "Mr. Aldis," she said. "All of them. The next 3 weeks were the loneliest of my life. I did not confront Duncan. I did not tell Corinne. I did not tell anyone at the firm except Priya, whom I asked to continue her review quietly and report only to me. I went to work every morning and sat across from Duncan at our weekly management meetings and listened to him discuss project budgets and client relationships with the same charm and confidence he had always displayed. And I smiled and nodded and took notes and returned to my office afterward and closed the door and stared at the wall for 10 minutes before I could start working again. What Priya found over those 3 weeks was worse than a single phantom subcontractor. She found 3: Pacific Ridge, Cascade Soil Analytics, Northwest Field Services, all fictitious, all billing against federal contracts, all approved by Duncan. The total across 22 months of invoices was $1.14 million. She also found something else, something that connected the money to a destination I had not expected. Two of the three phantom companies had bank accounts that received payments from Iverson Aldis's operating account. Those bank accounts, Priya discovered through public records, were controlled by an LLC registered in Nevada. The LLC's registered agent was a paralegal in Las Vegas. The LLC's beneficial owner, buried 3 layers deep in the corporate structure, was Corinne Iverson, my wife. I sat in my office at 7:30 on a Wednesday evening, alone in the building except for the cleaning crew running a vacuum in the hallway, and I read Priya's report, and I understood, with the slow, nauseating clarity of a man watching a building collapse in slow motion, that the two people I trusted most in the world had been stealing from the company, from the government, and from me for nearly 2 years. The invoices were against federal contracts, EPA, Department of Defense, federal money dispersed under federal procurement rules, subject to federal oversight. What Duncan and Corinne had been doing was not embezzlement, it was federal fraud. I knew what I had to do. I did not want to do it. I called the FBI. The Portland Division's Financial Crimes Unit assigned the case to Special Agent Elena Vasquez. She came to my office on a Saturday morning when the building was empty. She was compact, precise, and spoke in sentences that wasted nothing. She reminded me, in temperament, of the kind of engineer I most respect, the kind who measures everything and assumes nothing. I showed her everything Priya had found. She reviewed it for 2 hours without speaking. When she finished, she set down the last page and looked at me. "Mr. Iverson," she said, "you have 2 choices. You can confront your partner and your wife, and they will destroy evidence, retain attorneys, and make this case exponentially harder to prosecute. Or you can cooperate with us, continue operating normally, and allow us to build a case that will be airtight by the time we move." "How long?" I asked. 6 months, she said. "Maybe less." "I'll cooperate," I said. For 6 months, I lived inside the performance. I went to work every morning at 6:30 the way I always had. I parked in my spot at the depot. I walked past the sign that said Iverson Aldis Environmental Solutions, and I went inside and I sat at my desk and I did my job. I reviewed remediation plans. I signed off on field reports. I drove to project sites and walked contaminated ground in rubber boots and took soil samples with my own hands because I have never trusted a result I didn't verify myself. And every Tuesday, I sat in a management meeting with Duncan. That was the hardest part. Not the marriage, not the fraud, the meetings. Because the meetings were where Duncan was most himself, charismatic, confident, commanding, and where I was required to be most false. I had to listen to him discuss project budgets that I knew were inflated. I had to nod when he reported revenue numbers that I knew included payments to companies that did not exist. I had to shake his hand at the end of the meeting and say, "Good work, Duncan," and walk back to my office and close the door and press my forehead against the cool glass of the window until my heart rate dropped back below 90. Vasquez had told me, "Do not change your behavior. Do not show anger. Do not show suspicion. If he senses anything different in you, he will begin destroying evidence within hours, and the case dies." So I was the same Garrett I had always been. Quiet, steady, the engineer who came in early and left late and never made a fuss. Duncan had always underestimated that steadiness. He had always mistaken my silence for absence. He did not understand that the man who says the least at the table is often the man who is listening the most. And then I went home. I went home to Corinne. I ate dinners she cooked. I watched television beside her on the couch. I lay in bed beside her in the dark and listened to her breathing, and I thought about the hotel rooms in Bend and Sun River and on the coast. I thought about 17 check-ins over 3 years. I thought about the days she had said she was at the gym or at her sister's or running errands that took 5 hours. I did not touch her. I did not recoil from her either. I existed in the marriage the way you exist in a building you know is structurally compromised, carefully, with your weight distributed evenly, never leaning too hard on any one wall, always aware of the exits. There were nights I almost broke. There was an evening in November when Corinne came home at 8:30, "Jim," she said, and I was sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of water, and she kissed the top of my head and said, "I love you, Garrett," and I felt something inside me crack so quietly that no instrument on earth could have measured it. I smiled. I said, "I love you too." And I went to the bathroom and sat on the edge of the tub, the way I have sat on the edges of tubs in this story and in others, because that is where men go when they need to be alone with a truth they cannot yet speak. And I stayed there for 20 minutes until my hands stopped shaking. Vasquez checked in with me every 2 weeks. She never came to my office. We met at a coffee shop in the Alberta Arts District, a place where 2 strangers having a conversation attracted no attention. She was professional but not cold. She understood what the investigation was costing me personally, and she acknowledged it once, in a sentence I have not forgotten. "Mr. Iverson," she said, "cooperating witnesses in fraud cases are among the loneliest people I have ever worked with. I want you to know that what you are doing matters, and that the difficulty of it is not invisible to me." I thanked her. I drank my coffee. I went back to work. The retirement party was Duncan's idea. He announced it 3 weeks before the date in a company-wide email I was copied on but had not approved. The email said that after 25 years of extraordinary service, Garrett Iverson was stepping back from daily operations to focus on his health and his well-being, and that the company would be hosting a celebration of his contributions at Aviary, a restaurant in the Pearl District, on the evening of Friday, March 14th. I had not announced my retirement. I had not discussed my health with Duncan. I had not agreed to step back from anything. The email was the first move in what Duncan intended to be a forced buyout, framed publicly as a celebration so that by the time anyone questioned it, the narrative would already be set. Garrett chose to leave. Duncan is taking over. Everything is normal. I forwarded the email to Vasquez. She read it and said, "This is the moment. We move at the party." I invited her as my +1. She accepted. The evening of March 14th was cool and clear. Portland in March is either raining or about to rain, but this night the sky was open and the lights from the restaurant reflected off the wet pavement outside in long yellow streaks. Aviary was the kind of place Duncan loved: exposed brick, Edison bulbs, a cocktail menu that required a glossary. I arrived at 6:30 in a dark suit that I had owned for 9 years and was perfectly comfortable in. Vasquez arrived at 6:40 in her charcoal blazer, her credential case in her inside pocket, her expression set to the particular frequency of a federal agent who is about to do her job. I introduced her to the room as Elena, a friend from graduate school. No one questioned it. No one looked twice. She sat beside me and made small talk with the woman from HR and drank sparkling water and waited. The room filled. 91 employees, plus spouses and guests. Duncan had spared no expense. The company's expense, of course. There were past appetizers and a raw bar and a 3-tier cake that said, "Thank you, Garrett," in blue frosting, which I thought was a nice touch for a man who was being robbed. Corinne sat 3 chairs down from me. She was wearing a black dress I had not seen before. She smiled at me when she sat down, the smile of a woman who believed this evening was the beginning of a new life. She was right about that, just not in the way she intended. Duncan stood at 8:15. He clinked his glass. The room quieted. He gave a speech. It was, I will admit, a good speech. Duncan was always good at speeches. He talked about the early days, the surplus desk, the first contract, the late nights. He talked about my contributions. He talked about my health. He used the phrase well-deserved rest 3 times and the phrase new chapter twice. He was warm, generous, convincing. If I had not known what I knew, I would have been moved. Then he got to the buyout. "I've been in discussions with our board," Duncan said. "We did not have a board," he meant himself. "And I'm pleased to announce that I'll be purchasing Garrett's shares in the company to ensure a smooth transition. Garrett will receive a fair and generous package that reflects his years of service." He named a number. The number was $2.1 million. The company, by the most recent independent valuation, which I had commissioned myself, quietly, 3 months earlier, was worth $17.4 million. My 50% share was worth $8.7 million. Duncan was offering me roughly 24% of what I was owed. The room applauded. They did not know the real number. They only knew the one Duncan had told them, and it sounded large enough to be generous to people who did not understand the scale of what I had built. I looked at Corinne. Her hand was under the table. I could not see it, but I knew where it was. She was looking at Duncan with the expression of a woman watching a plan come together, the soft, satisfied glow of someone who believes the hardest part is over. I stood up. I lifted my glass. "Congratulations," I said. My voice was even. My hand was steady. "To 25 years. Then I turned to Vasquez. "Elena," I said, "I think now would be a good time." She stood. She opened the credential case. She said her name, her title, her unit. The room went silent. Then she said, "Mr. Aldis, I need to inform you that you are the subject of a federal investigation into fraud against the United States government. You are not under arrest at this time, but I am required to advise you that anything you say from this point forward may be used in court proceedings. I strongly recommend you contact an attorney before making any further statements." She turned to Corinne. "Mrs. Iverson, the same applies to you. You are a person of interest in this investigation. Please do not leave the Portland metropolitan area without notifying this office." The cake sat on the table between them. "Thank you, Garrett," in blue frosting. The Edison bulbs glowed amber. A server appeared in the doorway with a tray of desserts and stopped, reading the room, then quietly retreated. Duncan looked at me. His face had gone through every stage: confusion, recognition, calculation, fear, and arrived at a place I had not seen in 25 years of partnership. He looked small, not physically, structurally, as if the framework that had been holding him up, the charm, the confidence, the assumption that he was the smartest person in any room, had been removed, and what was left was just a man in a suit at a party that was suddenly not his anymore. "Garrett," he said. His voice cracked on the second syllable. "We can talk about this. We've been talking about it for 6 months, I said. You just didn't know who was listening." Corinne said nothing. She sat very still, both hands now on the table, her face unreadable. I looked at her for a long moment. I thought about the peony, the courthouse, the maple trees. I thought about 19 years and how many of them had been real and how many had been performance, and I arrived at the conclusion I had been dreading for months, that I would never know the exact ratio and that not knowing was its own kind of loss. I set my glass down. I buttoned my jacket. I walked out of aviary without picking up my coat from the check because I did not want to stand in a line and make small talk and wait for a coat while the room behind me rearranged itself around a truth that had been 22 months in the making. Outside, the March air hit my face like cold water. The pavement was wet from an earlier rain. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment and looked up at the sky, which was clear now, the clouds having moved east toward the gorge, and the stars were out. Not many, because this is Portland and the light pollution eats most of them, but enough. Vasquez came out behind me. She stood beside me on the sidewalk for a moment without speaking. "You okay?" she asked. "I will be," I said. "You did the right thing," she said. "A lot of people wouldn't have." "I know," I said. "That doesn't make it feel right yet." She nodded. "It will," she said. "Eventually." She gave me her card, which I already had, and she got into a dark sedan and drove away, and I stood on the sidewalk outside a restaurant that still had my name on a banner inside, and I breathed, and I let the night do what nights do after the worst is over. It kept going. The federal case moved forward with the grim, methodical efficiency of a system that has been given clean evidence and clear jurisdiction. Duncan retained an attorney who, after reviewing the scope of the charges, wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy to defraud the United States, false claims, advised him to negotiate. He pled guilty to 2 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of conspiracy. He was sentenced to 37 months in federal prison. Corinne was charged as a co-conspirator. Her attorney negotiated a plea to a single count of conspiracy. She received 14 months and 3 years of supervised release. The Nevada LLC was dissolved. The phantom companies were shuttered. The $1.14 million in fraudulent billing was ordered returned. The divorce was filed concurrently. It was not contested. Corinne received nothing from Iverson Aldis Environmental Solutions because the prenuptial agreement I had signed in 2005, at the insistence of Corinne herself, ironically, who had wanted to protect her own assets from any future claims, contained a clause that voided all marital property rights in the event of criminal conviction related to the business. Her own attorney had drafted that clause 19 years earlier. It held. I bought Duncan's shares for their actual value, minus the restitution he owed the federal government, and became the sole owner of the company I had co-founded in 1999. I kept every employee. I kept every contract. I renamed the firm Iverson Environmental, which was what it should have been called all along, and I hung a new sign on the door of the office and I went back to work. Priya Narayanan was promoted to controller. She is 30 now. She runs the financial side of the company with the same quiet precision she brought to my office that morning, 8 months before the party, when she knocked on my door with a laptop under her arm and the courage to say what she had found. I owe her more than a promotion. I owe her the company. I told her that once, over coffee in the break room. She looked at me with the serious, slightly uncomfortable expression of a young woman who does not know how to accept gratitude from a man old enough to be her father, and she said, "Mr. Iverson, I was just doing my job." "Yes," I said, "but you did it when it mattered. That's the part most people skip. I live alone now in the bungalow in Selwood. The dog died last year, 14 years old, a good run. The house is quieter than it has ever been. I have not redecorated. I have not removed Corinne's things from the closet, not because I am preserving her memory, but because I have not yet decided what kind of home I want to live in without her, and that decision, like all important decisions in my experience, should not be rushed. I go to work every day. I walk the sites. I review the data. I design the systems that clean up the damage other people have caused and walked away from. It is the same work I have been doing for 40 years, and it is still necessary, and I am still patient, and the patience is still worth more than brilliance. Some evenings, after the office empties and the parking lot goes dark, I sit at the surplus desk, the same $40 desk Duncan and I bought at the government auction in 1999, with the cigarette burn on the corner and the drawer that still doesn't close. And I think about the morning we shook hands and said, "Let's build something." We built something. It was real. And then one of us decided to take it apart while the other wasn't looking. And the one who wasn't looking turned out to be the one who had been looking the entire time. I don't hate Duncan. Hatred requires energy that I would rather spend on remediation. I understand him, the gambling, the debt, the escalation, the way a man who has been performing competence for 25 years eventually runs out of material and starts stealing the set. I understand it the way I understand a contaminated site, not with sympathy, but with the clinical recognition that the damage happened, and the only question now is how to clean it up. I don't hate Corinne either. I loved her. That love was real. The fact that it was not returned in kind does not retroactively erase the mornings we walked the dog along the Willamette, or the Saturdays we spent reading on the back porch, or the night she sat beside me in a hospital waiting room when my knee was being replaced and held my hand for 4 hours without once looking at her phone. Those moments happened. They were real. The betrayal does not own them. If you are listening to this and you suspect that the person you trust most, your partner, your spouse, the one who sits across from you every morning, is building something behind your back, I want you to hear this. Pay attention to the money. Money is the most honest language human beings have ever invented. It does not lie. It does not perform. It goes where it is sent, and it stays where it lands. And if you follow it carefully enough, it will tell you everything you need to know about the people who are moving it, and if you find what you are afraid to find, if the numbers tell a story you did not want to read, do not confront, do not accuse, do not let anger make you sloppy. Call the people whose job it is to build cases that hold up in rooms where the stakes are higher than a dinner party. Call them, cooperate, and wait. The waiting is the hardest part. But the waiting is also the part that separates the men who lose everything from the men who keep what they built. I kept what I built. And the desk with the cigarette burn is still mine. Some mornings, when I arrive at the office before anyone else and the parking lot is empty and the only sound is the hum of the HVAC system, I designed myself 20 years ago, I sit at that desk and I open the drawer that doesn't close. The same drawer that has never closed properly since 1999, and I think about the morning Duncan and I shook hands across it. 2 men, $30,000 each, a dream that was real. I think about what was lost, not the money. The money was recovered, not the company survived. What was lost was the belief that the person sitting across from you is building the same thing you are building. That belief, once broken, does not reassemble. You can build a new company, you can hire new people, you can change the sign on the door, but you cannot unknow what it felt like to discover that the man you trusted with half your life was stealing the other half while you were looking the other way. And then I close the drawer, or try to. It sticks, the way it always has, and I make coffee, and I go to work. Because the sites are still contaminated, the soil still needs cleaning, the groundwater still needs treating, and the man who does that work, the patient man, the measuring man, the man who stays on the site long after everyone else has gone home, is still me. Priya stops by my office most mornings with a cup of coffee and a status report. She does not knock. She walks in the way people walk into rooms that belong to them. I told her once that the office would be hers someday. She looked at me with the same serious expression she had worn the morning she first brought me her laptop, and she said, "Mr. Iverson, I'm not in a hurry. Good things take time." She was right. They do. Thank you for spending your time with us here at the Otis Archive. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of justice.